Millionaire CEO buys solo parent at an auction to start a family, but what he finds leaves him. In a world where wealth can buy anything, a lonely millionaire CEO bids on a solo parent at a shocking auction, hoping to build the family he's always dreamed of, only to discover a heart-wrenching secret that turns his world upside down. Broken yet reborn, as the woman he bought becomes the one who owns his heart. Before we go into details, click subscribe, like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're watching from on comment section. I pray may the good God Almighty bless and preserve you all and your family. Amen. Let's begin. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus Wellington's penthouse office like 1,000 desperate fists seeking entry. He stood motionless, a silhouette carved from shadows and expensive tailoring, watching the city lights blur into watercolor streaks 40 stories below. At 38, Marcus had everything the world told him to want: a billion-dollar tech empire, properties spanning 3 continents, a face that graced magazine covers, and a reputation that made competitors tremble. Yet tonight, in the suffocating silence of his corner office, he felt like a king ruling over an empty kingdom. His reflection in the rain-streaked glass revealed a man the world thought they knew: sharp jawline, dark hair threaded with distinguished silver at the temples, eyes the color of storm clouds over the ocean. But Marcus saw something different. He saw a boy who'd built walls so high that he'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. He saw his father's disapproving frown, heard his mother's last words before the cancer took her. Success means nothing, Marcus, if you have no one to share it with. 5 years. It had been 5 years since anyone had touched him with genuine affection. 5 years since Vanessa had walked out, her parting words still echoing in the marble and chrome halls of his consciousness. You're incapable of love, Marcus. You collect achievements like trophies, but you can't collect a human heart. I refuse to be another acquisition in your portfolio. His phone buzzed against the mahogany desk, its vibration cutting through his reverie like a scalpel. His assistant's name flashed on the screen: Diane, efficient and unflappable, the only person who dared to disturb him after hours. This better be important, Marcus said, not bothering with pleasantries. Mr. Wellington, I'm sending you an invitation that just arrived. It's unusual. Diane's voice carried a note of hesitation that immediately piqued his interest. In 10 years of service, she'd never sounded uncertain. Define unusual. It's for a charity auction. Very exclusive. Very private. The organizers specifically requested your attendance. They're calling it Building Tomorrow's Families. Marcus felt a muscle twitch in his jaw. Another charity event where socialites would parade their philanthropy like peacocks displaying feathers, where he'd write a check with more zeros than most people saw in a lifetime, smile for cameras, and return home to his elegant prison. Delete it. Send a donation. I'm not interested in. Sir, with respect, I think you should look at the details. This isn't a typical fundraiser. The proceeds go to single parents struggling to make ends meet, particularly those who've lost custody battles due to financial constraints. The auction itself is unconventional. Something in her tone made Marcus pause. Diane had been with him long enough to know what warranted his attention. He walked to his desk, the city lights casting long shadows across the room, and opened his laptop. The invitation materialized on the screen, embossed in gold lettering against a cream background. You are cordially invited to an evening of transformation. Building Tomorrow's Families is not merely a charity. It is a bridge between those who have everything but connection and those who have connection but nothing else. This exclusive auction offers successful individuals the opportunity to change lives, including their own. Attendance by personal invitation only. The Carlisle Estate. November 15th, 8 p.m. Black tie. What exactly are they auctioning? Marcus asked, a strange sensation prickling at the base of his spine, something between curiosity and an emotion he couldn't quite name. That's where it gets complicated, sir. They're not auctioning objects. They're auctioning opportunities. Single parents volunteer to be adopted by benefactors for 1 year. The winning bidder provides financial stability, housing, support, everything needed to create a stable family environment. In exchange, they get to be part of a real family. No legal obligations beyond the year, but the hope is that genuine connections form. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, the concept both appalling and fascinating. That's insane. That's essentially buying people. The literature insists it's completely voluntary. The single parents maintain full autonomy. They're not employees or servants. The benefactors can't make demands beyond what's agreed upon. It's more like an extended mutual support arrangement. The organization has been operating quietly for 3 years. They claim a 90% success rate in creating lasting family bonds. And they sent this to me because your donations to children's charities have been significant. Your name came up through mutual connections. But sir, there's a note attached to your invitation specifically. Diane's voice softened. It says, for the man who built an empire but forgot to build a home. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stood abruptly, the chair rolling backward, his heart hammering against his ribs with a force that surprised him. Who had sent this? Who presumed to know the hollow ache that consumed him in the dead hours of the night? I'll go, he heard himself say, the words emerging before his rational mind could intervene. Sir. Schedule it. Clear my calendar for that evening. And Diane. Find out everything you can about this organization. Who runs it, their success stories, their failures. Everything. Consider it done, Mr. Wellington. After disconnecting, Marcus returned to the window. The rain had softened to a persistent drizzle, and somewhere in the maze of lights below, people were living lives he'd forgotten how to live. Messy, complicated, connected lives. His empire of steel and silicon suddenly felt unbearably cold. He thought of his childhood home, before his father's obsession with success had poisoned everything. He remembered his mother's laughter, the smell of cookies baking on Sunday afternoons, his father's rare smile before ambition had carved away his humanity. He remembered the moment he'd promised himself he'd be different, successful but not cold, rich but not empty. Yet here he stood, having become exactly what he'd sworn he wouldn't. The invitation's words glowed in his mind, an evening of transformation. What did he have to lose? Money meant nothing anymore, just numbers and accounts, abstractions on spreadsheets. But connection, purpose, the chance to feel something real? Marcus pulled out his phone and opened his photo gallery, scrolling through images that documented success but not life. Awards ceremonies, business launches, handshakes with presidents and celebrities. Not a single genuine smile. Not a single moment of unguarded joy. He stopped on a photo from 15 years ago, him and his college roommate, David, with David's newborn daughter. Marcus remembered holding that tiny human, feeling the weight of potential and innocence in his arms, seeing David's transformation from carefree bachelor to devoted father. He'd felt something then, a longing so sharp it had frightened him. You'll make a great dad someday, David had said, his face glowing with exhausted happiness. When you finally stop running from your own heart. Marcus had laughed it off, thrown himself deeper into his work, built his first successful startup, then another, then an empire. He'd outrun that moment, that feeling, that possibility. Until now. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of anticipation and research. Diane's investigation revealed that building tomorrow's families was legitimate, founded by a child psychologist and a family law attorney who'd witnessed too many children lost to the system simply because their parents couldn't afford stability. The organization vetted both benefactors and families rigorously. Psychological evaluations, background checks, references. It wasn't buying people. It was creating opportunities for connection that society's structures had made impossible. Marcus found himself reading testimonials late at night, his scotch growing warm in his glass as he absorbed stories of transformation. A Wall Street executive who'd adopted a single mother and her autistic son, now inseparable after 3 years. A tech mogul who'd supported a single father and his twin daughters, eventually becoming their legal guardian when the father's health failed. A widow who'd taken in a struggling young mother, now business partners in a thriving bakery. The success stories were compelling, but it was the failures that haunted him. A socialite who treated the arrangement like charity tourism, taking photos for Instagram and abandoning the family after 3 months. A businessman who'd expected the single parent to function as an employee, leading to a messy legal battle. The organization had strict protocols now, but the stakes were real. These were human lives, not business ventures. Could he do this? Could Marcus Wellington, who'd built walls so high even he couldn't see over them, open himself to this kind of vulnerability? The night of November 15th arrived cold and clear, stars sharp as broken glass in the black velvet sky. Marcus stood before his mirror, adjusting his bow tie with fingers that trembled almost imperceptibly. His tuxedo was perfection, custom Armani, Italian leather shoes that cost more than most monthly salaries. He looked like success. He looked like power. He looked like a man who had everything. He looked like a lie. You don't have to go through with this, he told his reflection. You can write a check. Make a donation. Go home. Stay safe behind your walls. But his mother's voice whispered in his memory, don't let fear make you small, Marcus. Don't confuse safety with living. The Carlisle estate sat on 50 acres of manicured grounds an hour north of the city, accessible only by a private drive lined with ancient oaks that formed a cathedral ceiling of bare branches. Security was discreet but thorough. Marcus presented his invitation at 3 checkpoints before reaching the main house, a Georgian mansion that glowed like a jewel box against the darkness. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over perhaps 50 guests, all impeccably dressed, all wearing the same expression of masked anxiety beneath their social smiles. Marcus recognized several faces: a Supreme Court justice, a Hollywood producer, the CEO of a pharmaceutical empire, an Olympic gold medalist. Success and loneliness wore many faces, apparently. A woman approached him with a practiced smile, middle-aged, elegant, wearing her authority like a well-fitted gown. Mr. Wellington, I'm Dr. Patricia Hartwell, one of the founders. Thank you for coming. Doctor. Marcus shook her hand, noting her firm grip and assessing gaze. You're skeptical. Good. You should be. Her directness caught him off guard. This isn't a typical charity event, and we are not looking for typical benefactors. We are looking for people brave enough to admit they need something money can't buy. The literature insists it's completely voluntary. The single parents maintain full autonomy. They're not employees or servants. The benefactors can't make demands beyond what's agreed upon. It's more like an extended mutual support arrangement. The organization has been operating quietly for 3 years. They claim a 90% success rate in creating lasting family bonds. And they sent this to me because your donations to children's charities have been significant. Your name came up through mutual connections. But sir, there's a note attached to your invitation specifically. Diane's voice softened. It says, for the man who built an empire but forgot to build a home. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stood abruptly, the chair rolling backward, his heart hammering against his ribs with a force that surprised him. Who had sent this? Who presumed to know the hollow ache that consumed him in the dead hours of the night? I'll go, he heard himself say, the words emerging before his rational mind could intervene. Sir. Schedule it. Clear my calendar for that evening. And Diane. Find out everything you can about this organization. Who runs it, their success stories, their failures. Everything. Consider it done, Mr. Wellington. After disconnecting, Marcus returned to the window. The rain had softened to a persistent drizzle, and somewhere in the maze of lights below, people were living lives he'd forgotten how to live. Messy, complicated, connected lives. His empire of steel and silicon suddenly felt unbearably cold. He thought of his childhood home, before his father's obsession with success had poisoned everything. He remembered his mother's laughter, the smell of cookies baking on Sunday afternoons, his father's rare smile before ambition had carved away his humanity. He remembered the moment he'd promised himself he'd be different, successful but not cold, rich but not empty. Yet here he stood, having become exactly what he'd sworn he wouldn't. The invitation's words glowed in his mind, an evening of transformation. What did he have to lose? Money meant nothing anymore, just numbers and accounts, abstractions on spreadsheets. But connection, purpose, the chance to feel something real? Marcus pulled out his phone and opened his photo gallery, scrolling through images that documented success but not life. Awards ceremonies, business launches, handshakes with presidents and celebrities. Not a single genuine smile. Not a single moment of unguarded joy. He stopped on a photo from 15 years ago, him and his college roommate, David, with David's newborn daughter. Marcus remembered holding that tiny human, feeling the weight of potential and innocence in his arms, seeing David's transformation from carefree bachelor to devoted father. He'd felt something then, a longing so sharp it had frightened him. You'll make a great dad someday, David had said, his face glowing with exhausted happiness. When you finally stop running from your own heart. Marcus had laughed it off, thrown himself deeper into his work, built his first successful startup, then another, then an empire. He'd outrun that moment, that feeling, that possibility. Until now. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of anticipation and research. Diane's investigation revealed that Building Tomorrow's Families was legitimate, founded by a child psychologist and a family law attorney who'd witnessed too many children lost to the system simply because their parents couldn't afford stability. The organization vetted both benefactors and families rigorously. Psychological evaluations, background checks, references. It wasn't buying people. It was creating opportunities for connection that society's structures had made impossible. Marcus found himself reading testimonials late at night, his scotch growing warm in his glass as he absorbed stories of transformation. A Wall Street executive who'd adopted a single mother and her autistic son, now inseparable after 3 years. A tech mogul who'd supported a single father and his twin daughters, eventually becoming their legal guardian when the father's health failed. A widow who'd taken in a struggling young mother, now business partners in a thriving bakery. The success stories were compelling, but it was the failures that haunted him. A socialite who treated the arrangement like charity tourism, taking photos for Instagram and abandoning the family after 3 months. A businessman who'd expected the single parent to function as an employee, leading to a messy legal battle. The organization had strict protocols now, but the stakes were real. These were human lives, not business ventures. Could he do this? Could Marcus Wellington, who'd built walls so high even he couldn't see over them, open himself to this kind of vulnerability? The night of November 15th arrived cold and clear, stars sharp as broken glass in the black velvet sky. Marcus stood before his mirror, adjusting his bow tie with fingers that trembled almost imperceptibly. His tuxedo was perfection, custom Armani, Italian leather shoes that cost more than most monthly salaries. He looked like success. He looked like power. He looked like a man who had everything. He looked like a lie. "You don't have to go through with this," he told his reflection. "You can write a check. Make a donation. Go home. Stay safe behind your walls." But his mother's voice whispered in his memory, "Don't let fear make you small, Marcus. Don't confuse safety with living." The Carlisle estate sat on 50 acres of manicured grounds an hour north of the city, accessible only by a private drive lined with ancient oaks that formed a cathedral ceiling of bare branches. Security was discreet but thorough. Marcus presented his invitation at 3 checkpoints before reaching the main house, a Georgian mansion that glowed like a jewel box against the darkness. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over perhaps 50 guests, all impeccably dressed, all wearing the same expression of masked anxiety beneath their social smiles. Marcus recognized several faces: a Supreme Court justice, a Hollywood producer, the CEO of a pharmaceutical empire, an Olympic gold medalist. Success and loneliness wore many faces, apparently. A woman approached him with a practiced smile, middle-aged, elegant, wearing her authority like a well-fitted gown. "Mr. Wellington, I'm Dr. Patricia Hartwell, one of the founders. Thank you for coming." "Doctor." Marcus shook her hand, noting her firm grip and assessing gaze. "You're skeptical. Good. You should be." Her directness caught him off guard. "This isn't a typical charity event, and we are not looking for typical benefactors. We are looking for people brave enough to admit they need something money can't buy." "And what do I need, doctor?" "That's not for me to answer. But you're here, which suggests you already know." She gestured toward the ballroom, where guests were beginning to gather. "Tonight, you'll hear from 12 families. Single parents who've made the difficult decision to open their lives to strangers because they love their children more than their pride. Listen carefully. Trust your instincts. And remember, this isn't about saving anyone. It's about choosing to share life with someone in all its messy reality." The ballroom was arranged like a theater, with comfortable seating facing a small stage. Marcus found himself in the 3rd row, positioned between a nervous-looking woman in her 50s and a younger man who kept checking his watch. The anxiety in the room was palpable, a living thing that wound between the guests like smoke. Dr. Hartwell took the stage, her presence commanding immediate silence. "Thank you all for being here tonight. Before we begin, I want to address what we are doing and, more importantly, what we are not doing. We are not commodifying human beings. We are not facilitating transactions. What we are doing is creating bridges, connecting people who have resources but lack human connection with people who have connection but lack resources. Every person you'll meet tonight has been thoroughly vetted. Every one of them has chosen to be here, fully informed and completely autonomous. Your role as a benefactor is not to save them but to support them, to learn from them, to build something real together." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. Some of you will leave here tonight unchanged. Some of you will make bids based on ego or guilt or the story you want to tell at dinner parties. Those bids will be rejected. We are not interested in charity tourism. We are interested in transformation. If that makes you uncomfortable, there's still time to leave with our gratitude for your attendance and your donations. No one moved. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Then let's begin. The first parent was a single father, a veteran with a prosthetic leg and 2 young boys. He spoke about his struggles with PTSD, his difficulty finding employment that accommodated his disabilities, his boys' resilience despite their instability. His voice cracked when he talked about his older son asking if they'd ever have a home that didn't come with eviction notices. The second was a woman in her 30s, a former lawyer who'd fled an abusive marriage with her infant daughter. She'd lost her career, her support system, everything, but she'd save her child. Now she was rebuilding from nothing, her intelligence and strength evident in every word, but so was her exhaustion. Marcus listened to story after story, each one carving away another layer of his carefully constructed armor. A young man barely out of his teens, raising his baby sister after their parents died in a car accident. A woman who'd been a successful journalist until a rare disease stole her mobility. A father whose son had special needs that required round-the-clock care and bankrupted him despite working 3 jobs. Each story was different. Each was devastating. Each was beautiful in its rawness and resilience. And then the 9th person took the stage, and Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis. She was nothing like he'd expected. No practiced vulnerability, no performative struggle. She walked to the microphone with her shoulders back and her chin raised, defiance and dignity warring in every line of her body. She wore a simple blue dress that had clearly been purchased from a discount store, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. No makeup except a touch of lipstick that had probably been applied in the car. She was beautiful in the way a storm is beautiful, raw, real, impossible to ignore. "My name is Elena Martinez," she said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "I'm 32 years old. I have a 7-year-old daughter named Sophie, and I'm not here because I'm weak." The room seemed to lean forward collectively. "I'm here because the system is broken," Elena continued, her dark eyes flashing. "I was a middle school teacher. I loved my job. I loved my students. I loved building a life where my daughter could see that education matters, that hard work pays off, that single mothers can be strong and successful." Her voice hardened. Then Sophie got sick. Leukemia. 7 years old and fighting cancer. The medical bills came faster than I could process them. I had insurance, but it didn't cover enough. I took out loans. I sold everything we owned. I took a second job, then a third. I stopped sleeping, but it wasn't enough. Marcus felt his chest constrict, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "I lost my teaching job because I missed too many days staying with Sophie during treatments. Lost my apartment because I couldn't pay rent. We bounced between shelters and my car. Social services started making noises about whether I could provide adequate care. Can you imagine?" Her voice broke, just for a moment, revealing the fear beneath the anger. Fighting to keep your child alive while simultaneously being told you might lose custody because you're too poor to give her stability while you're fighting to keep her alive. She took a breath, visibly composing herself. "Sophie's been in remission for 4 months. The medical debt will follow me for the rest of my life, but she's alive. She's healthy. She's brilliant and funny and kind, and she deserves better than sleeping in a car. She deserves a home. She deserves to be a child instead of watching her mother fall apart." Elena's gaze swept the room, and for a moment, Marcus felt certain she was looking directly at him. "I'm not looking for a savior. I'm not a charity case. I'm a mother who made the impossible choice between my daughter's life and financial stability, and I'd make the same choice 1,000 times over. What I'm looking for is a partner, someone willing to help me get back on my feet, to provide stability for Sophie while I rebuild our lives. In exchange, you'll get to be part of something real. No pretense. No performance. Just life, in all its complicated, beautiful, terrifying reality." She stepped back from the microphone, her message delivered, her pride intact despite the exposure. As she walked off the stage, Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside him, like a lock tumbling open, a wall crumbling, a door he'd kept barricaded suddenly swinging wide. He didn't hear the remaining 3 presentations. His mind replayed Elena's words, her fierce dignity, the way she'd transformed vulnerability into strength. She wasn't asking for rescue. She was offering partnership. She wasn't selling her story. She was sharing her truth. When Dr. Hartwell announced the bidding process would begin, explaining the silent auction format where benefactors would submit sealed bids including financial commitments and personal statements, Marcus barely registered the details. He was already writing in his mind, already knowing with bone-deep certainty that this was why he'd come. Not to save anyone. To choose life. The silence in the private room where Marcus wrote his bid was absolute, broken only by the scratch of his fountain pen against heavy cardstock. Around him, other potential benefactors bent over their own submissions, faces tight with concentration and something more vulnerable, hope dressed in expensive clothing. Marcus had written countless business proposals, negotiated billion-dollar deals with confident precision, but his hand shook as he tried to articulate why Elena Martinez and her daughter Sophie should become part of his life. Dear Selection Committee and Ms. Martinez, I could fill this page with my financial qualifications, my net worth, my properties, my ability to provide every material advantage. But I suspect that's not what matters here. I'm 38 years old. I've built a technology empire that employs thousands. I've been on magazine covers and television interviews. I've achieved every goal I set for myself, and I've never felt more empty. My mother died when I was 16. Before she passed, she told me that success without connection is just expensive loneliness. I've spent 22 years proving her wrong, building walls so high I convinced myself they were protection instead of prison. Then tonight, I listened to Elena Martinez talk about fighting to keep her daughter alive while the system threatened to take her away, and something broke open inside me. Not pity. I heard her clearly when she said she's not a charity case, but recognition. She talked about making impossible choices. I've spent my life making the opposite impossible choice, choosing safety over vulnerability, achievement over connection, walls over windows. I don't know how to be a father. I don't know how to be a family member beyond writing checks and maintaining distance. What I do know is that I'm tired of being alone. I'm tired of success that means nothing. I'm tired of looking at my reflection and seeing someone my mother wouldn't recognize. If Elena and Sophie choose to share their lives with me, I promise this. I will provide every resource, every opportunity, every advantage they need. I will respect Elena's autonomy and intelligence. I will show up, not as a savior but as a student, learning how to be human again from people who never forgot. I'm not the safe choice. I'm not the easy choice. But I'm the honest choice, a man broken enough to admit he needs fixing, humble enough to learn, and desperate enough to try. Marcus signed his name, sealed the envelope, and handed it to the attendant before he could second-guess the vulnerability he'd just committed to paper. The financial portion was straightforward. He'd offered $3 million over the year-long commitment, plus full medical coverage, housing, education funds, and living expenses. But the money wasn't what would matter. They'd said as much. The waiting was excruciating. Guests mingled in the mansion's drawing rooms, making stilted conversation over champagne and canapes, everyone pretending this was just another social event while anxiety crackled in the air like static electricity. Marcus stood apart, watching snow begin to fall beyond the windows, each flake unique and temporary, like moments of connection he'd let slip through his fingers. First time. The voice came from beside him, the woman who'd been sitting to his left during the presentations. She was perhaps 55, elegant in the way of old money, but her eyes held genuine warmth. That obvious? Marcus asked. You have the look. Like you've just jumped off a cliff and you're not sure if you'll fly or fall. She extended her hand. Margaret Chen. This is my 3rd year as a benefactor. Marcus shook her hand, curiosity overriding his usual guardedness. You've done this before. With the Williams family. Jonathan, single father, 2 teenage daughters. His wife died of breast cancer, left him drowning in medical debt and grief. Margaret's smile held memories. First year was supposed to be temporary. That was 4 years ago. The girls call me Auntie Maggie now. Jonathan and I are business partners. He's a chef. We opened a restaurant together last year. They're my family. Any advice? Yes. Don't try to fix everything. Don't try to save anyone. Just show up. Be real. Let them see your mess, not just your polish. She studied him with disconcerting insight. You're the tech billionaire, aren't you? Marcus Wellington. Guilty. I read about you. Young genius. Built an empire. Never married. Very private. She paused. Very alone. Marcus felt defensive walls rising but forced them back down. Is it that obvious? Only to those of us who've been there. I lost my husband 7 years ago. Cancer. Spent 3 years in a beautiful house surrounded by beautiful things, dying inside. Then a friend dragged me to one of these events, and I met Jonathan and his girls, and they didn't want my money or my pity. They just wanted someone to show up for soccer games and help with homework and eat Sunday dinners that were more chaos than elegance. Her eyes glistened. They saved my life by letting me into theirs. Before Marcus could respond, Dr. Hartwell's voice echoed through the drawing room. Ladies and gentlemen, we have completed the selection process. Would the following individuals please join us in the library? She read out 8 names. Marcus's was among them. The library was smaller, more intimate, lined with leather-bound books and warmed by a fireplace that crackled with genuine flame. The 8 selected benefactors stood in a semicircle, facing Dr. Hartwell and her colleague, a distinguished man with kind eyes who'd been introduced earlier as James Chen, the organization's co-founder and family law expert. Congratulations, Dr. Hartwell began. You've been matched with families who felt your submissions demonstrated genuine readiness for this commitment. However, this is only the first step. You'll now meet with your matched family for a preliminary conversation. Both parties have the right to accept or decline the arrangement after this meeting. There's no obligation, no judgment if either party decides this isn't the right fit. She began calling names, pairing benefactors with families who entered from a side door. Marcus watched a nervous younger man meet the veteran father with 2 boys. Saw Margaret Chen embrace the family she'd mentioned. Clearly this was about formalizing another year of their arrangement. Observed careful handshakes and cautious smiles as strangers contemplated becoming something more. Marcus Wellington, Dr. Hartwell called. Elena and Sophie Martinez. The door opened, and Elena walked in holding the hand of a small girl with huge dark eyes and a pink knit cap covering what was clearly a bald head. Sophie. Marcus felt his heart stutter. They approached slowly, Elena's protective posture unmistakable. Sophie pressed against her mother's side but watching Marcus with curious intensity. Up close, Elena was even more striking. Not magazine beautiful but real, lines of exhaustion around her eyes, calluses on her hands, strength radiating from every fiber. Ms. Martinez, Marcus said, his voice rough. Sophie. He crouched down to be at the girl's eye level, some instinct telling him this mattered. It's nice to meet you both. Sophie tilted her head, studying him with the solemn assessment of a child who'd learned too young that adults weren't always trustworthy. You're really tall, she said finally. I am, Marcus agreed. Is that okay? I guess. Mom says tall people can reach things on high shelves. We need that. Elena's lips twitched, almost a smile. Sophie, sweetheart, why don't you tell Mr. Wellington what you like to do? I like reading, Sophie said, gaining confidence. And science. And unicorns, but I know they're not real. Mom says it's okay to like things that aren't real as long as you also like things that are real. What do you like? Marcus found himself smiling genuinely for the first time in months. I like reading too. And I build things, computer programs and companies. And I like chess, though I'm not very good at it anymore because I don't practice. I'm learning chess. The nurses taught me during treatment. I can beat Mom sometimes. Sophie's brilliant, Elena said softly, pride and pain mingling in her voice. Too smart for her own good. They were ushered to a quiet corner of the library, seated in comfortable chairs arranged around a small table. An attendant brought tea and cocoa, then discreetly disappeared. For a moment, silence stretched between them, weighted with possibility and fear. Elena spoke first, her directness unwavering. I read your submission. Marcus's pulse quickened. And? It was honest. I appreciate that. But I need to be honest too. She glanced at Sophie, who was absorbed in the marshmallows floating in her cocoa. We are not a project. We are not therapy for a lonely rich man. If we do this, I need to know you understand that Sophie and I are people with boundaries, needs, bad days, complicated histories. We are not going to fix whatever's broken in you. I don't expect you to, Marcus said, meeting her eyes. You're right. I am lonely. I am broken. But I'm not looking for you to repair me. I'm looking for a chance to be part of something real, even if I'm terrible at it. Especially if I'm terrible at it. Why us? Elena asked bluntly. There were other families. Less complicated situations. Why a single mother with medical debt and a daughter recovering from cancer? Marcus considered the question, aware that his answer would determine everything. Because when you spoke, you weren't performing. You were just. True. You said you're not looking for a savior, and I heard that. You said you want a partner, and he paused, surprised by the emotion catching in his throat. I've never had that. Partnership. Genuine connection. I've had employees and investors and competitors. I've had a fiancé who saw me as a trophy. But I've never had someone look at me and see a person they might choose to share life with, flaws and all. Elena studied him for a long moment. I don't need rescuing. I know. I don't need someone to take over. I need support, not replacement. Understood. Sophie comes first. Always. Every decision, every plan, every moment, she's the priority. Of course. And if this doesn't work, if you decide 3 months in that this is too messy or too real or too much, I need to know now. Because I can handle instability for myself. I've done it for 2 years. But I won't put Sophie through hoping for stability and losing it again. The fear beneath her strength undid something in Marcus. He leaned forward, his voice low and intense. Elena, I can't promise I'll be good at this. I can't promise I won't make mistakes or struggle or do the wrong thing. But I can promise I won't quit. When I commit to something, I see it through. It's the one thing I'm actually good at, showing up, day after day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Sophie looked up from her cocoa, sticky marshmallow residue on her upper lip. Are you going to be our family? She asked with the devastating directness of children. Marcus looked at this small girl who'd fought cancer at 7, who'd slept in cars, who deserved every good thing the world could offer, and felt something crack open in his chest, a place he'd kept sealed for so long he'd forgotten it existed. I'd like to try, he said softly. If that's okay with you and your mom. Sophie considered this gravely. Do you have a dog? No. But we could get one, if that's something you'd want. And a house? A real house? Not an apartment where people yell through walls. Yes. A real house. With a yard. And your own room. And bookshelves for all the books you want. Can Mom have her own room too? She always lets me have the bed and she sleeps on couches. Elena's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Sophie. It's a good question, Marcus said, his own vision blurring. Your mom absolutely gets her own room. The best room. With a comfortable bed and whatever she needs. Sophie nodded, satisfied. Okay. I think we should try. Mom, what do you think? Elena looked at her daughter, then at Marcus, and he saw the moment she made the leap, not because she trusted him, not because she believed in fairy tales, but because she was brave enough to hope despite every reason not to. Okay, she whispered. We'll try. Dr. Hartwell appeared as if summoned, her smile warm and relieved. Excellent. We have paperwork to finalize, logistics to arrange. Mr. Wellington, Ms. Martinez, Sophie, congratulations. You've taken the first step toward building a family. The hard work starts now. The next hour passed in a blur of documents and discussions. Legal agreements protecting everyone's rights and responsibilities. Financial arrangements. Housing options. Marcus offered his riverside property, a 6-bedroom house he'd purchased years ago and never lived in, kept purely as an investment. Weekly check-ins with the organization's counselors for the first 3 months. Ground rules about privacy, autonomy, expectations. Through it all, Marcus kept glancing at Elena and Sophie, still unable to fully process that they'd agreed, that they were coming home with him, not tonight, but in 2 weeks, after preparations could be made, after Sophie finished her current semester at her temporary school, after Elena could pack their few belongings and say goodbye to the shelter that had housed them. 2 weeks to transform his sterile showplace into a home. 2 weeks to prepare for something he had no idea how to do. 2 weeks to be terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. As they prepared to leave, Elena and Sophie to the shelter, Marcus to his penthouse, Sophie tugged his sleeve. He bent down, and she whispered in his ear, "Thank you for being tall enough to reach high shelves. We really do need that." Marcus watched them disappear into the snowy night, Elena's hand firmly holding Sophie's, two figures against the storm, and felt tears on his face for the first time in 15 years. He'd built an empire. Now he was going to learn how to build a home. The 2 weeks before Elena and Sophie moved in passed in a frenzy of activity that would have impressed Marcus's most demanding board members. He attacked the preparation like a corporate project: lists, schedules, consultants, execution plans. But as he stood in the empty riverside house on the first day, he realized this was nothing like any business venture he'd ever undertaken. This required heart, not just head. The house was beautiful in the way of things that had never been loved. 5,000 square feet of hardwood floors and crown molding, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a landscaped yard and the river beyond, a gourmet kitchen that had never cooked a family meal, bedrooms that had never heard the sound of a child's laughter. It was a museum, not a home. Marcus hired an interior designer named Keiko who specialized in family spaces. She took one look at the pristine emptiness and shook her head. "This is your problem," she said bluntly. "This house is afraid of life. We need to fix that." Over the next 10 days, they transformed the space. Elena's room became a sanctuary: soft blue walls, blackout curtains for someone who'd learned to sleep in loud, bright shelters, a king-size bed with a quality mattress, built-in bookshelves because Elena had mentioned loving to read before life became about survival. Marcus insisted on a sitting area with a comfortable chair and good lighting, a space that was hers alone. But Sophie's room was where Marcus surprised himself. He spent hours researching, consulting child psychologists, talking to parents. The result was a space that balanced whimsy with security. Walls painted like a sunset sky transitioning from blue to purple to pink, glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, but also nightlights for a child who'd spent time in hospital rooms, a reading nook with soft cushions, shelves at a height so she could reach her own books and toys. He filled it with things a 7-year-old might love: art supplies, science kits, a telescope for watching stars, books ranging from picture books to middle-grade novels. And unicorns. Despite Sophie saying they weren't real, he added subtle unicorn touches: a throw pillow, a small figurine on the nightstand, because children who'd faced cancer deserved to believe in magic. The kitchen became Keiko's masterpiece of functional warmth: a large table perfect for homework and family dinners, open shelving that felt welcoming instead of stark, a chalkboard wall where Sophie could draw. Marcus stocked it with cookbooks, realizing he'd have to learn to cook actual food, not just order from restaurants. He hired Dr. Sarah Chen, a family therapist, for weekly consultations. Their first session was uncomfortably revealing. "Tell me about your childhood," Dr. Chen said in her calm, penetrating way. "It was fine. Privileged. I had every advantage." That's what it looked like. What did it feel like? Marcus shifted in his chair. "My father was demanding. Success-oriented. My mother tried to balance it, but she got sick when I was young. After she died, home became more like a training ground than a family. And now you're creating a family of your own, in a sense. How does that make you feel?" "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm good at business, at strategy, at building companies. But building a family? Being someone a child could depend on? I'm operating completely blind." "Good," Dr. Chen said. "If you weren't scared, I'd be worried. Fear means you understand the stakes. Now, let's talk about realistic expectations." She was ruthlessly practical. This wouldn't be a Hallmark movie. There would be struggles, conflicts, moments when everyone would question the arrangement. Sophie would test boundaries. Children always did. Please write the conclusion of the story in this session. 364 days later, Marcus Wellington stood in the kitchen of the riverside house watching snow fall through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Tomorrow marked exactly 1 year since Elena and Sophie Martinez had walked through his door, suitcases in hand, fear and hope mingling in their eyes. Tomorrow, the official agreement ended. Tomorrow, they would have to decide if what they'd built together was real enough to last, or if this had been just a beautiful, temporary dream. The house smelled of cinnamon and vanilla. Elena was baking cookies in preparation for tomorrow's anniversary party, though they'd carefully avoided discussing what they were actually celebrating. Or deciding. The uncertainty hung in the air like the snow outside, beautiful and suffocating in equal measure. Marcus heard Sophie's laughter from the living room where she was building an elaborate Lego structure, her pink knit cap replaced months ago by a full head of thick dark hair. She'd grown 3 inches this year, her body finally free to thrive without the poison of chemotherapy. Her last checkup had shown she was still in remission, 16 months now, each one a miracle Elena prayed over every night. "You're brooding again," Elena said, appearing beside him with flour on her cheek and knowing eyes. "I can hear you thinking from 2 rooms away." Marcus smiled, reaching out to wipe the flour away with his thumb, a gesture that had become natural over months of shared space and gradually dissolving boundaries. Just reflecting. "This time last year, I was terrified. And now, still terrified. Different reasons." Elena leaned against the counter, studying him with the directness he'd come to cherish. Over the past year, she'd transformed from the defensive, exhausted woman at the auction into someone who laughed freely, who'd gone back to teaching part-time at a local middle school, who'd rebuilt her life with fierce determination. But she'd also learned to accept help, to lean on him when she needed support, to trust that his commitment was real. "We need to talk about it," she said quietly. "I know. Tomorrow the agreement ends. We are supposed to decide if this continues or if Sophie and I move on with the financial support the organization provides for transition." Marcus's chest constricted. The thought of this house without them, without Sophie's artwork covering the refrigerator, without Elena's books scattered on every surface, without the sounds of life that had transformed his sterile showplace into a home, was physically painful. "What do you want?" he asked, though his heart hammered with fear of her answer. Elena's eyes glistened. "I want to tell you about the moment I knew." "Knew what?" "That this was real. That you weren't just fulfilling an obligation." She moved to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. It was 3 months in. "Remember when Sophie had that nightmare about being back in the hospital?" Marcus nodded. He'd never forget that night, Sophie's screams pulling him from sleep, finding her thrashing in tangled sheets, Elena trying to soothe her while falling apart herself. He'd stood frozen in the doorway, completely out of his depth, watching the 2 people he'd come to care about drowning in trauma he couldn't fix. "You didn't know what to do," Elena continued. "You just sat on the floor outside her room for the rest of the night. When Sophie woke up the next morning and found you there, still in your pajamas, exhausted, she asked why you'd stayed. You said, 'Because nobody should wake up from nightmares alone.'" Elena turned to face him, tears streaming down her face now. "That's when I knew you weren't trying to save us. You were just showing up, being present, being real." Marcus felt his own eyes burning. "I didn't know what else to do." "That's why it mattered. You didn't perform. You didn't try to fix everything with money or solutions. You just stayed." She crossed to him, and he could smell her shampoo, lavender, a scent that had become synonymous with home. "Do you know what you've given us this year, Marcus? A house, stability, resources." "No." Her voice was fierce. "You've given us yourself. Your awkward attempts at cooking breakfast that always end with smoke alarms. Your terrible dad jokes that make Sophie groan but secretly love. The way you show up at every single one of her school events, even when you have board meetings. How you learned to braid hair because Sophie wanted fancy braids like her classmates. The way you look at both of us like we're the most important thing in your world." "You are," Marcus whispered. "You both are. This year. Elena, I've lived more in these 12 months than in the previous 20 years combined. Every dinner around that table, every homework battle, every Saturday morning pancake disaster, every nightmare and triumph and ordinary Tuesday, I've felt alive." "Then why are you brooding?" "Because tomorrow, you get to choose. The agreement says you can walk away with full support, housing, financial assistance, everything you need to be independent. And you should consider that, Elena. You've rebuilt your life. You don't need me anymore." Elena laughed, the sound breaking through the tension. "Marcus Wellington, for a genius, you can be remarkably stupid." "What?" She took his face in her hands, her calloused palms warm against his skin. "Need isn't the point anymore. Maybe it was in the beginning. I needed stability, you needed connection. But somewhere along the way, need became want. Then want became love." Marcus's breath caught. They'd never said the word. They'd danced around it for months, their relationship evolving from awkward housemates to friends to something deeper neither had dared to name. They'd shared late-night conversations after Sophie went to bed, talking about their pasts, their fears, their dreams. They'd learned each other's rhythms, how Elena needed quiet mornings before she could face the world, how Marcus got restless when he worked too long without a break, how they both craved order but had learned to embrace the beautiful chaos Sophie brought. 3 months ago, Their hands had brushed during a movie, and instead of pulling away, their fingers had intertwined. Neither had acknowledged it, but neither had let go. 2 months ago, Elena had fallen asleep on his shoulder during a particularly boring school board meeting they'd attended together, and Marcus had sat motionless for an hour, memorizing the weight of her head, the sound of her breathing. 1 month ago, he'd kissed her forehead when she'd broken down crying over a student who reminded her of Sophie's struggle, and she'd turned her face up to his, their lips meeting in a kiss that tasted like tears and hope and coming home. But they'd never said the word. Elena. "Let me finish," she interrupted. "I love how you've transformed from a man who didn't know how to be around a child into Sophie's favorite person. I love that you still get nervous before her parent-teacher conferences even though she's an honor student. I love how you've learned to cook exactly 3 meals competently and refuse to give up on the 4th even though you've burned it 17 times. I love that you cry at children's movies and pretend you're not. I love that you've built this home for us, but more than that, you've built yourself into someone who knows how to live in it." Marcus pulled her close, his heart so full it ached. "I love you," he said against her hair. "I love Sophie. I love the life we've built. I love who I am when I'm with you both, messier, more human, more real. This year was supposed to be temporary, but Elena, I don't want temporary. I want forever. I want every morning and every nightmare and every ordinary Wednesday. I want to be Sophie's father, not just on paper but in every way that matters. I want to be your partner, your family, your home." "Yes," Elena breathed. "Yes to all of it." They stood holding each other as snow fell outside, 2 broken people who'd found wholeness in each other, until Sophie's voice interrupted. "Are you guys kissing? Because I'm trying to build here and the mushy stuff is distracting." They broke apart laughing to find Sophie standing in the doorway, hands on her hips, trying to look annoyed but failing to hide her smile. "Come here, princess," Marcus said, crouching down. Sophie ran into his arms, and Elena joined them, and they stood in a 3-person embrace that had become their evening ritual. In these moments, Marcus always marveled at how far they'd come, from strangers at an auction to this, whatever this was. Family. Home. Love. "So," Sophie said, her voice muffled against Marcus's shoulder, "does this mean we are staying? Like, staying? Forever staying?" Marcus looked at Elena over Sophie's head, saw his own emotions reflected in her eyes. Joy, relief, love, fear, hope, all tangled together in the beautiful mess of choosing each other. "If you want to," he said carefully, because even now, even after everything, he needed them to know this was their choice. Sophie pulled back, her dark eyes serious. "I wrote you a letter. For tomorrow. For the decision day. Want to hear it?" "Of course." Sophie ran to her backpack and returned with a piece of paper covered in careful 7-year-old handwriting, decorated with drawings of unicorns and stars. She cleared her throat dramatically. "Dear Marcus, 1 year ago you were a stranger who was very tall and looked scared. Mom was scared too, but trying not to show it. I was scared because I didn't want to hope for things that wouldn't happen. But you made us hope anyway. You gave us a house but also a home. You gave Mom her smile back. You gave me a dad even though you didn't have to. You learned to braid hair even though you're bad at it. You come to all my stuff even when it's boring. You read to me every night even when you're tired. You make Mom happy. You make me feel safe. So I think we should stay. I think we are already a family. We just need to make it official. Love, Sophie. P.S. Can we get a dog now?" By the time Sophie finished, all 3 of them were crying and laughing simultaneously. Marcus scooped her up, marveling at how light she was, how precious, how his. "Yes to everything," he managed through tears. "Yes to staying. Yes to family. Yes to forever. Yes to the dog." Sophie whooped and threw her arms around his neck. Elena wrapped her arms around both of them, and they stood in their kitchen, their home, holding each other as snow turned the world outside into a winter wonderland. That night, after Sophie went to bed, Marcus and Elena sat on the couch with hot chocolate, her feet tucked under his legs, talking about the future they were choosing together. "I want to do it right," Marcus said. "Not just the 3 of us living together. I want to adopt Sophie, if you'll let me. I want to marry you, if you'll have me. I want to build something legal and permanent and real." Elena's smile was incandescent. "Are you proposing?" "Not yet. I want to do it properly. But I'm Pre-proposing? Announcing my intention to propose? Is that a thing? With you, everything is a thing. She kissed him softly. And yes, to adoption, to marriage, to all of it. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. What? This year, I've watched you transform. You're not the same man who stood in that ballroom, scared and alone. But there will still be hard days. Days when Sophie's past trauma resurfaces. Days when I fall back into anxiety about money even though we are stable now. Days when you retreat into work because emotions get overwhelming. This isn't a fairy tale. It's real life, messy and complicated. I know, Marcus said. And I'm ready for it. All of it. The mess is the point, Elena. For years, I kept everything clean and controlled and empty. You and Sophie have brought beautiful chaos into my life, and I never want to go back to the sterile silence I used to call living. They talked until midnight, planning their future. Sophie's adoption would take months, but they'd start the process immediately. Marcus wanted Elena to finish her teaching credential, to return to the career she'd loved full-time if she wanted. They'd look for a dog at the shelter, giving a home to another being who needed one, Sophie's idea and a perfect one. They'd keep their weekly dinners with Dr. Chen, the family therapist, because even happy families needed support. They'd travel, show Sophie the world, build memories, be a family in every sense. The anniversary party the next day was intimate. Just them, Dr. Hartwell and James Chen from the organization, Margaret Chen and her family, Dr. Sarah Chen their therapist, and a few friends they'd made over the year. The house filled with laughter and life, so different from the museum it had been. Dr. Hartwell pulled Marcus aside as the party wound down. You've exceeded every expectation, she said warmly. When you submitted that bid, I wasn't sure. You were so closed off, so uncomfortable with vulnerability. But you've done the work, Marcus. You've built something beautiful. They built it, Marcus corrected. Elena and Sophie. They taught me how. You taught each other, Dr. Hartwell said. That's how family works. Mutual transformation. You gave them stability and resources, but they gave you purpose and love. Neither set of gifts is more valuable. They're equally necessary. As the last guests departed and Sophie fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from excitement, Marcus carried her to bed. He tucked her in, smoothed her hair back, and whispered, I love you, princess. Thank you for taking a chance on a tall stranger who didn't know what he was doing. Sophie's eyes fluttered open. You still don't know what you're doing half the time, she mumbled sleepily. But you try really hard. That's what makes you a good dad. Dad. She'd called him Dad. Not Marcus, not the tall man, but Dad. Marcus returned to the living room where Elena was cleaning up, and without a word, he pulled her close and buried his face in her neck, his shoulders shaking with the force of emotions he'd suppressed for decades finally breaking free. She called me Dad, he choked out. Elena held him as he cried, tears for the boy he'd been who'd never felt good enough, for the years he'd wasted building walls, for the life he'd almost never lived. But mostly tears of gratitude for a charity auction, a fierce single mother, a brave little girl, and the chance to become someone worth becoming. 3 years later. The backyard of the Riverside house was chaotic with Sophie's 10th birthday party. 12 kids running through sprinklers, adults laughing on the patio, a golden retriever named Phoenix barking joyfully at the chaos. Marcus stood at the grill, spatula in hand, watching his daughter, legally and completely, orchestrate games with the natural leadership she'd inherited from her mother. Elena appeared beside him, her belly round with their son due in 6 weeks. They'd married 2 years ago in this same backyard, with Sophie as maid of honor and Phoenix as ring bearer. The wedding had been small but perfect, family and close friends, vows that made everyone cry, a celebration of what they'd built together. You're doing it again, Elena said, sliding her arm around his waist. Doing what? Looking at all this like you can't believe it's real. Marcus kissed her temple, his free hand resting on her belly where their son kicked strong and steady. Sometimes I still can't. 4 years ago, I was alone in a penthouse, convinced this kind of happiness was for other people. Now I'm burning hamburgers for 10-year-olds while our daughter runs a mini empire of birthday guests and our son tries to kick his way out early. The hamburgers are burning, by the way. Damn it. Marcus flipped them hastily, and Elena laughed, the sound that had become his favorite music. Sophie ran up, breathless and glowing. Dad! Dad! Can we do cake now? Please. Absolutely, birthday girl. Go gather your subjects. As Sophie ran off, shouting instructions to her party guests, Marcus marveled at her transformation. She was healthy, thriving in school, passionate about science, and still secretly loved unicorns. She had nightmares sometimes. Trauma didn't disappear completely, but they'd learned as a family how to navigate the hard moments together. She was in therapy, they all were, because mental health was as important as physical health. And she was happy. They all were. The cake was an elaborate unicorn creation that Sophie had designed herself, a blend of her childhood whimsy and her growing sophistication. As Marcus lit the candles and everyone sang, he caught Elena's eye across the crowd. She was crying happy tears, one hand on her belly, surrounded by the community they'd built, friends, colleagues, their family therapist who'd become a friend, Margaret Chen, and her family, neighbors who'd embraced them. Sophie closed her eyes to make her wish, and Marcus knew exactly what he'd wish if this were his cake, that this moment, this life, this family would last forever. But he didn't need to wish it. They'd built it. Together. One choice, one day, one moment of showing up at a time. That night, after the guests left and Sophie was asleep and the house was quiet except for Phoenix's gentle snoring, Marcus and Elena sat on their bedroom balcony watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Tell me again, Elena said softly, nestled against his side. Tell me about the man you were before. It was a ritual of theirs, remembering who they'd been to appreciate who they'd become. I was successful but empty, Marcus said. I had everything but nothing that mattered. I was so afraid of vulnerability that I'd built a prison and called it an empire. I was dying inside so slowly I didn't even realize I'd stopped living. And now I'm a father who burns hamburgers and brags too much about his daughter's science fair projects. A husband who still gets nervous asking his wife on dates even though we are married. A man who's learned that success isn't measured in dollars or deals but in bedtime stories and family dinners and moments like this. Now I'm alive. Elena tilted her face up, and he kissed her deeply, tasting forever in her lips. I love you, she whispered. Thank you for taking a chance on us. Thank you for teaching me how to live, Marcus replied. You and Sophie saved my life. We saved each other. Inside, Phoenix barked softly in his sleep, probably dreaming of chasing squirrels. Sophie's nightlight glowed under her door. She still liked it, even at 10. Their son kicked strong and steady against Elena's belly, impatient to join the family they'd created. And Marcus Wellington, who'd once thought himself incapable of love, held his wife on a balcony overlooking a yard where his daughter would play tomorrow, and felt gratitude so profound it brought tears to his eyes. He'd gone to an auction looking for purpose and found family. He'd offered money and resources but received something infinitely more valuable: love, connection, belonging, home. The Millionaire CEO had bought a chance at a different life at that auction 4 years ago. But what he'd found wasn't what he'd expected. He'd found two people who saw past his wealth to his humanity. Two people who needed what he could provide but offered what he desperately needed in return. Two people who'd transformed his house into a home, his existence into life, his fear into love. He'd found his daughter in a little girl who'd fought cancer and won, who'd slept in cars and shelters but never lost her kindness or her hope. He'd found his wife in a woman fierce enough to choose vulnerability after being broken, strong enough to accept help without losing her independence, brave enough to love a man who'd forgotten how to be loved. He'd found himself in the process, not the polished version he'd presented to the world, but the real version, messy and uncertain and trying his best. The version that made mistakes and apologized. The version that cried at school plays and burned dinners and loved with everything he had. Most importantly, he'd found family. Not the traditional path of marriage then children, but a chosen family, built piece by piece through commitment and courage and showing up even when it was hard. A family that had taught him the most important lesson of all, that success without love is just expensive loneliness, but love, real, messy, complicated, beautiful love, that's the only wealth that matters. As stars multiplied overhead and Elena's breathing slowed into sleep against his shoulder, Marcus Wellington whispered a prayer of gratitude to the universe, to fate, to whatever force had brought him to that auction on a snowy November night. He'd gone looking to fill the void in his life. He'd found everything he'd never known he needed. And he'd learned that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't acquired through transactions. They're built through transformation, chosen through courage, and cherished through commitment. The Millionaire CEO had bought a chance at redemption. What he'd found was so much more than he'd ever imagined. He'd found home. He'd found love. He'd found life. And in the end, that was worth more than all the money in the world. This emotional journey explored themes of redemption, chosen family, vulnerability, healing from trauma, and the transformative power of love. Marcus Wellington's journey from isolated billionaire to devoted father and husband parallels Elena and Sophie Martinez's journey from survival mode to thriving. Their story reminds us that true wealth lies not in material success but in meaningful connections, that family is built through choice and commitment, and that it's never too late to tear down walls and learn to live with an open heart. Thank you so much for taking your time watching. I pray may God reward you all. Please, before you leave, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.